As I have been going around and really doing everything I can, every time I see anybody and meet with anybody, I realize even more what a crucial election it is, just by talking about it and seeing the mood. So let me just, I've known Hillary quite a long time. We went to the same college. She's 10 years younger than I am, but at least I know where she got her study habits. And I got to know her basically at the beginning when she was head of the Children's Defense Fund. And the more that I go over her resume, it makes me realize that each of the things that she's done brings out some aspect of her experience and her character and her traits in so many ways. So the Children's Defense Fund is something which shows that she cares about giving a voice to those who can't speak for themselves. Children and families, and she has been so dedicated to that, and she was from the beginning that as she got involved in it and would come to Washington to talk on behalf of the children. Then, when I was ambassador at the United Nations and she was First Lady, it was very clear of the things that she was really interested in, and there are a lot of people who kidded about the fact that she was channeling Eleanor Roosevelt, and she would come up to New York the way Eleanor Roosevelt had, and Hillary wanted to meet with the different ambassadors and find out what was going on in their countries and how they saw the United Nations. And so we then went to the Women's Conference in Beijing. And there were questions as to whether the First Lady of the United States should go to Beijing at that particular time to talk about human rights. And she definitely wanted to in every single way. By the way, I'm often asked about life balance issues. I left my own daughter's wedding reception to go to Beijing. And let me just say, what was so interesting about that, we've all been to lots of conferences where people mingle around and buzz and then have meetings on the side. But when Hillary spoke, there was silence, and she totally electrified the whole place. And when she said women's rights were human rights and human rights were women's rights, she set the agenda for women's issues internationally in a way that continues to be important. And one of the traits here is that not only does she speak her mind and make clear about American values, but she never gives up on anything. So what happened last year was the 20th anniversary of the Beijing Women's Conference, and she asked the people around her to figure out whether the countries that had made kind of pledges to live up to the action programs, how they were doing, what was going on, was the agenda being fulfilled. And that's kind of a sign once she's into something, she's really into it. Then, when I became secretary, we did a lot of things together. And by the way, I am totally in the tank for Hillary. All the obvious reasons, but one is that I wouldn't have been Secretary of State if it hadn't been for her. And the reason I know that is President Clinton said so publicly when we were traveling abroad. So just to give you the context, what happened in kind of like November 1996, it was clear that Secretary Christopher wasn't going to stay as Secretary of State, and so there began to be discussions about who was going to be his successor. And so my name was out there, and I was a cabinet member as ambassador to the UN and a member of this small committee of, it's called principals, who are the ones who look at the issues to present them to the president on national security issues. And because I was in New York, I was on TV and stuff, so my name was there. And then somebody said, yeah, well, I mean, Madeleine's name might be there, but you can't have a woman be Secretary of State because Arab countries would not deal with a woman. And then the Arab ambassadors at the UN got together, and they said, we've had no problem dealing with Ambassador Albright. We wouldn't have any problems dealing with Secretary Albright. So that was the White House, and I never want to know who, said, yeah, Madeleine's on the list, but she's second tier. So apparently, then I did become Secretary of State, and then what happened is often President Clinton and First Lady Clinton and I would travel together, and I would introduce her and she would introduce him. So on one of these trips, he said, he described what went on during this period of great mentioning, which was that Hillary said to him, "Why wouldn't you name Madeleine? She is most in touch with your views and represents them better than anybody else, and besides it would make your mother happy." So, so when I was secretary, one of the things I did was to ask her to kind of be a super ambassador and travel around the world and see what she could do in terms of representing America's values. And she really was fantastic and showed another of her very characteristic traits. She listened to people. She definitely, had to have her share of meetings in fancy rooms, but she much more enjoyed going out and talking to people and really listening to them and seeing what they were interested in and what we could do. Then she went to the Senate. And there are a lot of people who thought that she might be a diva when she got there. That is the opposite. She put her head down and she really worked and made it a point of studying and then also working across the aisle. So in terms of national security issues, what was really important was that she was on the Armed Services Committee. And that gave her a way to understand how the military and civilians worked together, what budget issues were, what were the military needs, how the vets were being treated. And then she worked with Lindsey Graham in order to put forward a health program for the National Guard. And so that was a very important period in her life. Then we also know that she and Senator Obama ran against each other. And what I find so interesting was how this all ended up. I'm chairman of an organization called the National Democratic Institute that does democracy work abroad. And I talked to them there about the fact that compromise is not a four-letter word, and that it's important to form coalitions and think about what's good for your country, which is exactly what happened. President-elect Obama called Senator Clinton and asked whether she would be his Secretary of State. And they decided yes, she accepted, because she believes in coalition building and in thinking about what is best for our country. And she was a terrific Secretary of State, really. What she did in terms of restoring America's reputation is so unbelievably important in terms of really explaining to people who we are. She did a lot of traveling. And again, she listened. Another one of her, the way that she pulled everything together. And so it is very clear that nobody has ever been as well prepared to be President of the United States. There's absolutely no question. She has experience across the board. Then the part that I think is so interesting, there are very few people that have an ability to deal with domestic as well as foreign policy questions. I'm not bad on foreign policy, I'm not so good on healthcare. But the bottom line is she can combine it, she understands the domestic sources of our policy, and she does listen. And so she is going to be a great commander-in-chief, and I think that the issue now is how to make that happen. This has been a very long campaign. We are finally coming to the end of it, and therefore this is where you all come in. Because I think that the part about really connecting this incredible candidate to the fact of going out and voting and actually making it happen is so important. I have followed many, many campaigns. I have never seen anything like this one, or the lack of competence of the other person. I think it is stunning. I spend a lot of time to this day going abroad and having a lot of friends that are in high places abroad. They call me up regularly and say, "Are you people crazy? What is going on here?" Because they know Hillary and they listen to some of the really ludicrous stuff that Trump says. He is dangerous even in running for president, because what he has done is undermine our alliance structure, say, NATO doesn't matter, and kind of blackmailing people into their support of NATO, having countries question whether we would live up to our obligations. suggesting that the Japanese and the South Koreans should have nuclear weapons, any number of things that are frankly crazy. I teach at Georgetown. I teach a course on foreign policy. He would flunk it. So we have an incredible choice, and I think really what all of you are doing is so important. Let me just say this, I'm a naturalized citizen. I came to the United States when I was 11 years old from Czechoslovakia. My father was a Czechoslovak diplomat. We spent the war in England during the Blitz, and then we went back to Czechoslovakia, and then he became ambassador to Yugoslavia, and then the communists took over, and so we came to the United States. He defected and asked for political asylum, and I became a citizen while I was in college. And so when I describe myself, I say grateful American. And what my father said regularly, he'd say, when we were in Europe during the war, people would say, "We're so sorry, your country's been taken over by a terrible dictator. You're welcome here. What can we do to help you, and when are you going home?" When we came to the United States, people said, "We're so sorry, your country's been taken over by a terrible system. You're welcome here. What can we do to help you? And when will you become a citizen?" And he said, that is what he said. And obviously, one of the great privileges and responsibilities of citizenship is voting. And I hope that as you go around, you can persuade people of that. What I love to do is go to naturalization ceremonies. And I can't swear people in because I'm not an officer of the law, but I can give them their naturalization certificates. And so the first time I did that was actually on July 4th, 2000 at Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's home. And as I handed out the naturalization certificates, I'd say, I have exactly the same piece of paper. It's the most important document you will ever get. Keep it safe. And then I heard some man saying, can you imagine that the Secretary of State gave me my naturalization certificate? And I said that I, as a refugee, could get it from the Secretary of State. And I said, can you imagine that in this country a refugee is Secretary of State? How important your part in all of this is. And since it's Sunday, I'm going to say, go forth and multiply. Really, we need you. We're all going to do this together. And thank you very, very much for doing this.
Thank you.